This talk is called Kotlin, Practically Speaking. And so who am I? I am Andrew Watson. I am a senior Android developer at Microsoft. Yes, Microsoft does Android development. And I'm on the Yammer team. The Yammer app is like a work social network collaboration tool, that sort of thing. It's part of the Office 365 suite. So if you use Outlook, theoretically, you might have access to Yammer if your company is using it. So I work on the Android app for that. It's my Twitter handle, Creative Drewy. I'll be posting these slides, a link to these slides there. It's on the web, so you can capture the slides if you want, or you can just wait and follow me there, and they'll be up there. So who are you? So I'm really curious, who's a fan of Kotlin here? Okay. Who is able to use it in their app? Oh, okay, so there's a good number of you. It's interesting. It seems like maybe the room is divided 50-50. That's good to know. But what I'm going to talk about is actually more related to that initial process of getting started migrating and converting your code base to Kotlin. So even if you've already done it, there might be some things here that we've done or we've learned that are helpful to you. For those of you who haven't yet brought in Kotlin, this really is the talk for you. We've been using Kotlin on the Yammer team for 1.5 years, ever since Google made it official. And I can tell you it is great. So I'm going to start by talking about the path we took to get started with Kotlin on our team, and then a lot of practical lessons regarding Kotlin integration and stuff like that. This really isn't a talk about why Kotlin is great or how to write better Kotlin code. It's really the nitty-gritty on there are some things that you encounter that you don't expect when you start bringing Kotlin in, and that's what I want to talk about, because I've seen a lot of good talks about Kotlin, but I haven't seen people talking about this specific thing. So yeah, specifically migrating and converting an existing code base. If you're starting from scratch, a lot of these issues won't be there, but most of us are dealing with some amount of Java code that we have to convert. So that's where this talk comes in. So getting the party started at Yammer. Let's go back in time to May 2017. I personally had been using the unofficial Kotlin since 2015. I was so ready for a better programming language than Java. I was okay with Kotlin before it was officially started, or officially supported rather. There was good community support back then, but it basically didn't have great integration with anything on Android, but it worked. It added 7K methods to the DEX just because. It added about 45 seconds to the build time of any app, but man, it was such a nice language, it was worth it. It was like, I'd been using retro lambda. Did anybody use retro lambda? That just brought lambda, yeah. It brought lambdas to Java 7, it was very nice. I was using that, and then it's like, I don't care, this is great. So by the time May 2017 rolled around, Google had, or rather the community had really upped the game. JetBrains was really doing a lot of work. They had actually, even before Google officially supported it, they had got it integrating with the instant build system or the instant run system and that sort of thing. Then at I/O 2017, Google made it official. Kotlin was fully supported, so that was awesome. But our team was understandably mixed about Kotlin support. It's a new technology. They've got a lot of experience with Java, and so it wasn't just there were some of us on the team that were, obviously I had used it, I loved it. There were people who didn't see the reason why. So it was a good place. We weren't just all ready to kind of jump in and make all kinds of mistakes. So we took our time bringing in Kotlin. And so I don't know, I'm not sort of really trying to prescribe how you might bring Kotlin onto your team. I'm just trying to tell our story. But maybe this can help you and you can follow a similar path. So we didn't make anyone do Kotlin right away. And instead, we did a book club for 6 months. And we read the sort of de facto Kotlin book, Kotlin in Action, by 2 of the people on the JetBrains team. I think they're either language designers or tool designers and stuff like that. Pretty sure we just did it once a week over lunch. We just read a chapter per week. So we weren't kind of forcing it. People were at least reasonably open to the idea that Kotlin could be better. But we didn't outright block the usage of it either. We allowed people to do it. I was bringing it in, that sort of thing. Excuse me. So then after we did all that, our next steps were we tried to write a draft of Kotlin coding standards, really before we really started getting going with Kotlin. And the idea was if we can all sort of agree on what Kotlin should look like, what we're expecting, we'll just be in a better place. It won't be the Wild West, right? So we have the standards first, and then we can start writing the Kotlin. And then what we recommended is that if people wanted to get started writing Kotlin, that they should convert unit or espresso tests, because it's not production code. You can make more mistakes, and you can really get a feel for what Kotlin is like. And you can write some nice extension methods. You can sort of play with a lot of the good language features that Kotlin has, and you're not affecting any production code. And that's what a good number of our developers did, is they converted the espresso test. So for a long time, we had a very good Kotlin conversion in our unit tests, but not so much in our app. And so I feel like that was a really good way to get people on board. And so then eventually, we made the decision that all new code was to be written in Kotlin. We have a lot of Java code. We're going to maybe leave that there. We'll figure out what we want to do with that. But new code should be written in Kotlin, get help, that sort of thing. And I can say that by the time we made this step, everyone felt comfortable enough to do it. There's still a little bit there's always that little bit, you're learning something new, kind of getting over that hump, but everyone did it. What I've been telling people is I feel like when you do Kotlin, when you start doing Kotlin, there's maybe like a 2-week period of time where it doesn't feel natural. You forget to, instantiate variables with val or var, and it just feels a little, it just feels stunted because it's something new. But after about 2 weeks, it stops feeling weird. It starts feeling very natural. And then maybe when you're going back and forth between Java and Kotlin, it might be a little weird as you're switching. But after a while, you just do it naturally. So you just be patient with yourself. So a word on Buyin from higher-ups. I would imagine maybe some of you who are wanting to integrate Kotlin or start with Kotlin are being told you can't by higher-ups, not necessarily based on any decision of yourself. So in our case, thankfully, we had the freedom to do this. We've got pretty decent autonomy on our team. Yammer was an acquisition from Microsoft. They kind of let us do our own thing. There's just an ethos of, do it seems right. But that's not enough for some higher-ups. I can tell you intuitively that things are better in a lot of ways, but I can't give you numbers. I can't necessarily provide you with hard statistics that say this is why you should do it. Official metrics on why Kotlin is better would be really nice. And I think at Dev Summit this year, during the fireside chat, somebody actually asked for that, and the team sort of was like, yeah, that's actually a really good idea. Can you write features faster? Do you write less code? Do you write better code? That sort of thing. So that is something that may be coming. So I don't have that. So this still doesn't help those of you whose higher-ups are blocking usage. But my hope is that maybe this talk could help you get buy-in, because these are the things, like what I'm going to be talking about are the things that you will encounter that can cause problems. And if you can have those in your back pocket, maybe you can say, listen, there's really no reason not to try this. We know what to expect. But I will say one thing. Kotlin is not Swift. I've talked to 2 teams now whose higher-ups are blocking the usage of Kotlin because they had a bad experience with Swift. The iOS team brought in Swift, and it ended up causing many, many problems for their team. So, for example, Kotlin does not introduce a 100-ish meg runtime. I'm pretty sure if you introduce Swift into your iOS app, you just plunk down 100 megs per app because it's got to bundle all this crazy stuff. Kotlin doesn't have that. I'm pretty sure there's no build time, no impact on build time with Kotlin. I'm putting a question mark. As it is now, it's so integrated so well. I'm pretty sure there's 0 impact. I could be wrong, but if there is impact on build time, it is not noticeable for day-to-day development. I mean, there are many other things that are going to impact your build time that you bring in without any problem, and Kotlin really isn't one of them. And of course, Kotlin has complete interop with Java code, so there's just, it's completely side by side. They live very happily together, and so really, the Kotlin impact, and again, I can tell you this, it may not be enough, it's more like a library than a new tech stack. You know, you might bring in OK HTTP, or you bring in RxJava, and you just start using it. People probably don't, you know, make you give a reason, or you know, you're not running OSS libraries by your higher ups. Really, the impact is like a library. When you bring it in, when you start using it, that's its impact. And so, you know, you could ask for forgiveness, not permission. I wouldn't recommend that, but I mean, really, like that's the effect. Like nobody would know you had Kotlin in the code base. So maybe that can help you win an argument for Kotlin. All right, so on to the things we have learned. So the first lesson is that the autoconverter leaves work for you to do. So I don't know if you know, but Android Studio, JetBrains has provided a way to automatically convert a Java file to Kotlin. And interestingly, it makes some not great decisions when it converts your Java code to Kotlin. So I will show you. So imagine we have this activity written in Java. It's a pretty standard, you know, activity. You've got your view model factory that's being injected. You've got a button that's a class level variable field. You set a click listener to show a snack bar. You get your view model. You set a Boolean from, you know, some method in the view model, and then you've got a bottom navigation view. You have a navigation listener, and you know, you kind of get the item ID, and then when you navigate around with the bottom navigation, you do some things in the switch statement. Java's verbose enough that the code doesn't even fit on the screen. So, you know, very standard stuff. So this is what, when you convert with the autoconverter, this is what comes out right away. So just kind of going through it, what you can see is what it did is it took the class level variable, the button, and like apparently Kotlin is so weird to GitHub gists that it can't syntax highlight it. I don't know what's going on there, but whatever. So you've got the button, it makes it nullable and sets it to null by default. Same thing with the view model, it makes it null by default. And then anywhere these class level variables are being utilized, it puts this Bangbang, which in Kotlin just says, hey, I know this is, you know, this is nullable, but just if it's null, just throw a null pointer exception. Just force the, you know, just ignore the nullability entirely. You know, creates a click listener and it has like a little, you know, lambda variable and puts it in the snack bar. Down here in the bottom navigation listener, it does successfully convert the switch to a when block, which is really cool. But then it, you know, again, you see Bangbang everywhere. And it does this return label, because you have to sort of say what you're returning from, and it duplicates that. It's got this rando false over here. So, you know, this is okay, but this is error prone. This doesn't really solve any errors, and it just kind of, I don't know, it looks kind of rough. Oh yeah, by the way, there's like a lambda argument there and that sort of thing. So that's what comes out of the converter by default. But we can do better. So this is actually the code you want from your Kotlin conversion. What you want is you want your class level variables, if you can, you don't want them to be null, and there's this late in it. Again, if you already know Kotlin, I'm trying not to like talk about the Kotlin language too much, but basically you're just saying that this is going to be initialized later. There's never going to be a case where it's not null, but it can't be assigned right away. Very common in Android, since everything gets instantiated in onCreate and not the constructor. And so by doing this, you don't need the Bangbang anymore. It's not nullable. It's assumed that it's going to be not null. And you can utilize it over here in our Lambda. We don't really need a Lambda variable. We can use it, which is the sort of a default indicator for a one argument Lambda. And so it's just very, very syntactically terse. It's very nice. Down here in the listener, when statements or switch, you know, the analog to switch statements can return. So you don't have to return from every point in the when block. So you just, you know, put your return values, and then you can just do return when. You can put just one return label, and then make sure you cover all your cases. So you've got case 1, 2, and then else is the false. And then again, you don't really need a Lambda argument. So you can do when you're dealing with the item ID, these are the cases. So it's a little bit better. You're not breaking the nullability. And so you can imagine if you have a larger class with many more injected fields, many more, say, class level state variables, many more things, the conversion can get a little wonky. Like it can actually, like this is a very contrived example, and oftentimes if you're dealing with more, older Java files, there's just a lot in there, and so you start converting it, and all of a sudden you get all these weird squiggly red lines, and things don't work. And there are some like data cases, I didn't dig into them, but there are just sometimes where just weird things happen and you don't really know what's going on. So it's good to be aware of that you will need to do work to make your Kotlin code better after you auto-convert. So regarding companion objects are kind of the new form of static variables in Kotlin. This is a very common use case where you've got an activity and you've got a static method that creates the intent for that activity. It's static, so other activities can call it. You've got a static extra value. And so when you convert it by default, it puts those static things in a companion object, as you can see here. And so you've got your static field, and then you've got your static method that creates the intent. When you consume this code, it makes you use companion all over the place. So you have to do like group edit activity, dot companion, dot create for activity, group edit activity, dot companion, dot get group ID extra. That's the other kicker. The static field becomes this weird getter method right there. So this isn't super fun to read. Actually maybe it's more verbose than Java was, which is weird. So you want to be aware of that, and you probably have a decent number of static methods in your activities, or some. So what you want, the right way, is you want to make your fields consts, and then you want to mark your methods as JVM static. And then when you consume it, it will look the way you expect it to. So there's no reason for this not to be a const. There's no reason for this not to be JVM static. So then it's just activity.method, activity.field. So you want to make sure you do that as well. All right, lesson. Converting to Kotlin can introduce crashes. I would be remiss if I did not say this. Most often, it is related to null values. Let's take a closer look at our conversion. So this was the initial conversion that I showed you before, and there's a very insidious bug in this code. Can anyone find it? Just like yell it out or whatever. It's injected. So it's a view model factory, and then we do the view model providers. View model factory. What's that? That's good, that's good. But actually what it is, what I was looking for, is that right here, the saved instance state is not marked as nullable. And guess what? It is null, a lot. And the reason I include this method, or this problem, is because I introduced it. I converted a fragment, pushed it into master, went into beta, crashed for everybody. So that was awesome. So this is actually a bit of a contrived example. So now Android has actually annotated their lifecycle methods with nullable. So when you convert it to Kotlin, the bundle will have a question mark. But at Microsoft, and sometimes you have to override the lifecycle methods. At Microsoft, we have this policy management library, and so we actually have different lifecycle methods that we have to override, and those were not annotated. So sure enough, I was using those methods, and when I converted to Kotlin, saved instance state came in as a non-nullable bundle. So as soon as any null comes through, it's an exception. I think it's illegal state exception or something like that, and it just crashed on that fragment. So these are the sorts of things that will happen a lot when you convert to Kotlin. So first of all, run your code after you convert it to Kotlin. That's a decent idea, which I did not do. At least I thought I did. But yeah, these are the sort of things that you got to be aware of. And I tried to think of another Kotlin crash that wasn't related to nullability, but I couldn't think of one. But there may be some. So you have to be aware. We have to be aware that converting to Kotlin will create crashes, or can create crashes. It doesn't have to. All right. Lesson, Kotlin conversion will wipe all of your Git history. So let's say you've got a file that's got this wonderful, wonderful history. When you look at the Git history for that file, it goes all the way back into 2017. You can see what was going on. We have files that go all the way back to 2013. And this information is of limited utility. You may or may not go and look at the history of a file, but it can be informative. It's nice to have that sort of ongoing thread of history and conversation around a file that you can go back and refer to. So if you have a Java file, you convert it to Kotlin, you commit it, it's gone. History's just gone. And what's interesting is this is actually a Git issue. It's not the autoconverter's fault. If you start reading about it online, it actually gets oddly philosophical or almost religious, as Git often does in the world. And the reason they made this decision is, Git doesn't track diffs or track the history of files just by the file itself. It uses some shawing, and it's based on contents and stuff. So basically, the decision that they made is that if you completely change the contents of a file and change the name, it's a different file. So it should have a new revision history. So in this case, when you convert to Kotlin, the file gets renamed from .java to .kt, so it's a different file. The contents get completely changed. Git has no way to link those two things together because that's the way Git is programmed, so that history is gone. The only way you can see the history that you had before would be to revert the entire code base back to a state before the conversion, and then the Java file will be there. Just the Java file has to be there in the history for you to see it. So it's not gone, but it's not easy to get to either. You can't easily see that history. So how do we actually maintain the Git history? This is the best method that I've found, and it works, but it looks onerous, but it's not too bad. And if anybody has a better way, I really would like to know it, because this is not good. So the way I recommend to do it is use the autoconverter that JetBrains provides. So convert. Clean all the autoconvert issues that I talked about earlier, things like that. Make sure the app builds, and run it too. I should have put that in. So clean up all those issues. So now you've got a Kotlin converted file that works. It doesn't have the weird coding issue, it doesn't have the weird autoconvert issues. Copy those contents to a Scratch file. Revert everything. So now you're back to where you were before. Then, so if you've got multiple files, I would recommend doing this step for all of them at once. So maybe you're doing an activity and a fragment. Do them both. Do steps 1 through 4 first. So you've got the converted Kotlin somewhere else. Now go back and rename just the file or files that you're converted to .kt. Commit it. Your build is mega broken. You have a bunch of files, 1 or more files named kt that have Java contents. App will not run. Now paste in your converted Kotlin code that you just created and commit a second time. Or first, make sure you can build. Now you're converted. So what that does is this method provides enough of a link for Git to know the history of that file. And I would highly recommend in the commits where your build is broken, make a note in that commit. So if you notice these 2 commits right here, we have that. It says, rename some more files for Kotlin conversions, note the build is broken, finish up Kotlin conversion, build works. Don't squash. So you cannot get rid of these 2 commits. If you squash these 2 commits, it becomes a rename and change, and you lose everything. So if you were to look in our Git revision, this is what you would see. You would see a bunch of stuff like this, and oftentimes it'll be 4 or 5 files. Step 1, where you rename, is 3 files, and then step 2, where you finish it up, it's 3 more files. So, we're doing the best that we can with what Git provides. And so, again, you have to weigh whether or not you want to save that revision history. We lost a lot of revision history of our unit tests. It's just gone. And maybe it would be nice to have it. But now we try to do this. And sure enough, after I gave this talk the first time, I went back, I did a conversion, and I didn't look, and I clicked after my PR was approved, and I'm like, yeah, approve and squash. And it was gone. So it's very easy to do. It's very easy to do. Another lesson we learned, your custom lint rules don't apply here. But they do probably need reviewing anyway. So you may have written some custom lint rules for your Java, and naturally, you're not dealing with Java anymore. It's Kotlin, but chances are if you wrote them any time before, I don't know, 2 months ago, they're using Java Scanner, and they don't apply. In our case, I was wanting to introduce a new lint rule, and I was looking at them, at what we had, and it turned out our lint rules, our custom lint rules weren't running anyway, and then they were based on some old assumptions that we didn't have anymore. We just didn't care about those things, or they weren't relevant. So maybe your lint rules are much more up to date and stuff like that, but if they are relevant, then you've got some work to do to make them work for Kotlin. But if not, maybe you don't need them. We have less lint rules, custom lint rules than we did before. So how do you update your lint rules? You do not use Java Scanner anymore. You use UAST Scanner. Ha, just kidding. The documentation on lint has not historically been very good, and finding resources about it has been like difficult, if not impossible, to try and know exactly what you need to do in a lint rule. And Google makes no bones about the fact that it changes regularly. So, excuse me, we have a custom lint rule, the custom lint rule that I wrote. It's using UAST Scanner, which was the updated version of Java Scanner, which UAST is the Universal Abstract Syntax Tree. It is a way of describing the code that is Java or Kotlin agnostic. But thankfully, okay, so thankfully, they actually did a Dev Summit talk, this last Dev Summit in 2018, where the guy actually goes over in good detail how to write custom lint rules with this new stuff. And there was actually a really good talk yesterday too, one of the earlier sessions in the day where they talked about detect, lint, that sort of thing. He went over how to write a custom lint rule, that sort of thing. But I actually wasn't really paying attention when I was watching this Dev Summit video the first time, and I went and looked, and I'm like, oh, he's gonna write a lint rule with UAST Scanner. No, now it's source code scanner. It changed again. So, I mean, like, lint is a very weird place to be, but can be really helpful. So I would definitely recommend watching that talk in detail. But in general, now when you're writing your lint rules, you're writing them in a syntax agnostic way. You're saying this is going to work for both Java. We want to make sure that we don't do these certain things. And I guess I don't know if you really want to target certain things in Java. Maybe you still do Java Scanner and not UAST Scanner. But the overarching thing is that if you want your lint rule to work for all code, the old ones don't work. It just works on Java. So another lesson, really, don't use Bangbang. Do not follow the autoconverter's example. The autoconverter it forces Bangbangs in there all over the place, but with rare exception, if you're using Bangbang, you're doing it wrong. You're probably just like, I hate the fact that I have to do question mark on this thing and I have to like worry about the logic. You're short-circuiting Kotlin's nullability features. You don't want to do that as much as you can. There are cases where you do have to do it depending on like APIs and stuff like that. But our rule, the rule that we set up, given that this will generate a null pointer exception, and the whole point of Kotlin is to not do null pointer exceptions, if we see a Bangbang in a PR, we make the person who committed it explain themselves. And so we really want to make sure that those things don't leak into our code because it can really cause problems over time. And so a lot of times what it is somebody just forgot to remove it after auto-converting. That's what I do all the time. But then again, there are times where it sort of has to be that. So I just would say make a hard and fast rule, really try and avoid using that, and then make exceptions. It'd be nice if you could do like a lint rule that says don't use Bangbang, but then of course there are, so it can't be an error because there are legitimate cases to use it. So it could be a warning, but nobody pays attention to warnings because you can just ignore them. So I don't know, it's better to just enforce it with the team. So another lesson, Kotlin Files really can share a home with your Java files. This may seem obvious, but to us, it wasn't. We initially had created two source directories, base source set directories for Java and Kotlin. And I think the thinking was that we were maybe a little afraid of having those two files side by side. And it would, it would confuse us. You'd open a file, you wouldn't know what sort of source code you were looking at. It did make conversion pretty painful. In addition to the steps I just outlined, you had to worry about where you were putting the file. We would have to duplicate package and directory structures. It was difficult, but it made us feel safe for a while. But after a while, we just realized there's absolutely no reason for us to do this. And we were totally comfortable with .java and .kt files side by side. There's a different icon in the project browser in IntelliJ and Android Studio. And now, when I open a .java file, I don't necessarily pay attention to the .java. I just get like an icky feeling, and I don't realize what it is. And then I'm like, oh, .java. That's why I don't like it. So, I think it's fine. You begin to have no. I think maybe too we were worried about like trying to switch back and forth between Java and Kotlin. It'd be a mental overhead. Now you do it with ease. So, again, you can try this, but it's a bit more work. It makes conversion harder, and I think ultimately you're just protecting yourself. It's scary, but you'll get over it. Another lesson, some files just can't be converted to Kotlin. And it's a sad fact, but it's the truth. The older the file, the more likely it is you can't convert it in general. A lot of times, like base classes, like base activities and stuff like that, just won't commit. You'll have things like protected fields, getters and setters. Like getters and setters by default, that you have getters and setters that you have in Java get turned into, just like instead of like .getName, it just turns into .name, and that might conflict with a field that you have in the class called name, and then you have these weird issues. And so there have been many cases where I've converted an older file, and just it doesn't behave the way you want. It won't compile. It'll tell you have naming conflicts. It's very, very weird. And then also, what happens is that we all have made assumptions about nullability, or we like to use null as data state. We've been able to be lazy with Java. In Java, null is like a state. So we just say, if it's null, then it's the non-existent, non-started state. So you'll have all these null checks in your code, and you're just making assumptions around, like you're just saying, if it's null, it's not this. If it's not null, it is this or something. And when you bring it to Kotlin, that starts causing all sorts of problems, and those assumptions are kind of irrelevant. Kotlin does make you think differently about state and about nullability. So those old assumptions are irrelevant. And so again, you might convert and you just might find that you're getting crashes. Bangbang, again, that's why having the rule around Bangbang is so good, because you could just Bangbang everywhere and just it'll be fine, but then you'll still get crashes. So in that case, what I would recommend is, for us, chances are if a file, what's interesting is if a file can't be converted, chances are it's got enough tech debt that it could eventually be like rewritten almost. Like it's probably got old architecture. You're probably not, it may not even have like a view model or a presenter. Like chances are there's some things in it that could just literally die. And that's definitely true for us. The older the file, the less likely it is we really want to keep it around. And eventually just replacing it with something better is what we should do. Something new, maybe rip out some of the logic, right? Like what's also nice, by the way, I didn't say this, but if you copy Java code into a Kotlin file in Android Studio, it auto-converts it for you, which is really nice. It somehow parses the text that you pasted in and it'll convert it so you can grab the logic. But you just got to be aware, some of your older files, some files that you've just made bad assumptions, you're just not going to be able to convert. This might be a bit controversial, but with Kotlin, you do not have to write any more utils classes or any more helper classes. What I would recommend is extension methods for starters. So extension methods are awesome in Kotlin. They allow you to do a lot of really cool things. And so the way we organize our extension methods is by the class type that is being extended. So for example, as you can see in this example, we have calendar extension methods, the calendar Java object. So we have calendar extensions.kt. We came up with a directory structure for those extensions, and then we put those in there. Maybe if you have packages divided by like, domain and UI, you can have extension directories in each of those. So like activity extensions, view extensions, widget extensions, that sort of thing. But what you do need to know about extension methods is that they're glorified static methods. But if you have a bunch of utils with a bunch of static methods, it's the same thing. What I want to say is what Kotlin can kind of help you do. Again, I think as Java developers, we've been able to be lazy. Just like, oh, let's just create, I don't know where this functionality goes, so I'm just going to put it in utils. We can try and be more intentional than that, right? Like, there's probably an actual class that can actually be constructed, that can actually be injected and actually be tested, that instead of just throwing in a bunch of utils, right? So I think by at least thinking about not having utils, you can start thinking, what am I actually doing and how do I actually encapsulate this? And so extension methods have all the same limitations as static methods in terms of like you can't mock them without power mock or some of the methods that people talked about yesterday. So if you can, just be very careful with your extension methods. But also what's interesting about Kotlin is you can have extension methods and then you can just have functions. Like it doesn't have to be an extension methods. Kotlin has package level functions and it can just live anywhere. This can be really dangerous because you can just have rando functions scattered about your code base. So you really want to be intentional. I don't know how much time I've got. Oh gosh, okay, I'm almost done. I can just ramble on for hours about this. But it's something to be aware of. Like if you want to put it in a util and it's just one method, maybe it just needs to be a package method. And then maybe if you add another one, there's a class to be made, right? So you don't have to have a utils. If it's just a method, just have a package method, but be sure you put it somewhere intentional. All right, so another lesson we learned, evolve your coding standards. Again, a lot of the decisions that we made were regarding, were related to the fact that we didn't know what we were doing. So like originally we thought we didn't want to use the it keyword, which is like the default Lambda parameter, built-in Lambda parameter. We were scared of it. We didn't think we'd know what it means. After a while, you get used to reading it and seeing, you just kind of infer what it is. We also thought that, okay, well, Kotlin doesn't make you declare type when you declare a variable. We're like, well, when you're reading a PR, you're not going to know what type of variable is. So let's be explicit, even though you don't have to declare that type so people can read your PR. Truth of the matter is, we don't really care anymore. Again, you just start learning how to code better, how to think better, and it starts becoming very clear what things are. But you'll have to figure out your own changes to your coding standard. I think it's really good to have it up front because it puts everybody on the same page. You're going to see things when you're reading through that Kotlin in Action book that you don't like, so put your coding standards, but evolve them because you'll get better. And so one thing I want to say is you really can start thinking better and different with Kotlin. This is a really cool method that was written by one of my colleagues, Chris Perry. He's at the conference. It's a chain method. So it's a method that takes any number of higher order functions and just runs them. And so this is what's so cool about Kotlin. You can pass functions around. So let's say you're writing some method and you're sick of log statements being like side effects to your methods, right? Like you need to log something, but it's like having that in your method is just like, it's a side effect. All the method does is do something. So what you can do with like this chain method is pass in a lambda and do the log and then pass in the actual function that does the thing. And now it's not really a side effect. There's a separate method that does the logging and then the function that you wanted to call is there. And trying to do this in Java just wouldn't work. You just couldn't do it. You just have to do a side effect or something else weird. So just little things like this, you can just really start thinking like, what am I trying to accomplish and how can I make sure I'm not violating good coding principles and stuff like that. So this is just one example. Okay, so a final word. And I was inspired to put this slide based on Kate Kelly's talk that she gave late yesterday because she made a point. She was talking about tackling tech debt and she made the point that like, well, maybe you'd be, think, hey, I'm trying to tackle tech debt, so I'll just convert it to Kotlin. And it needs to be said that Kotlin conversion is not the same as eliminating tech debt. We just have to get that out. You're not eliminating tech debt by converting to Kotlin. You're making things better, but it's not eliminating tech debt because you have to know all these other things. So we really have to be sober about the conversion that we're doing. But yes, I can tell you it is worth it.